The station smelled like recycled air and machine oil, the way it always did at the start of the morning shift. Viridian Outpost was not a beautiful place. It was a working place, a deep space research station that floated in orbit above a thick jungle planet called Veth 4, where the trees were the size of buildings and the animals were things that could kill you in under 3 seconds. The station was big enough to house almost 200 crew members from 11 different species, and small enough that everyone knew everyone else's face, even if they could not always pronounce each other's names. Nora Callahan had worked the maintenance and cargo route on the lower habitat level for almost 2 years. She was 28, had short brown hair that she kept tucked under a gray work cap, and walked with the kind of steady pace that comes from doing the same job long enough that your body just knows where to go without being told. She was not particularly tall, not particularly loud, and most days went about her shift without making much noise at all. On that particular morning, she had 6 supply crates to move from the loading bay on level 4 down to the biology wing on level 2. It was not complicated work. It was just heavy work, and there was a lot of it. She had her cart, her scanner, and a thermos of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She was on her 4th crate when she passed the corridor that ran alongside the xenobiology containment wing. The containment wing was where the station kept animals brought up from Veth 4 for study. Most of them were small things, insects with too many legs, blind cave fish, thick-shelled beetles. But 3 days ago, a transport ship had delivered a clutch of Vreth eggs, and 2 of them had hatched early. The Vreth were what the station's alien researchers called Apex-class predators. Adults could grow to the size of a large ground vehicle, with scales that were harder than most metals and claws that could cut through hull plating if they tried hard enough. Even a hatchling, a creature only a few days old, was not something you wanted to be near without a containment barrier between you and it. The species file listed them under Threat Classification 7, which was 1 level below the kind of things that required full station lockdown if they ever got loose. Nora did not know that one of the hatchlings had gotten loose. Nobody did, yet. The ventilation gaps in the containment wing were rated for standard-sized specimens. Nobody had accounted for a hatchling that was smaller than average, the runt of the clutch, barely 30 centimeters from snout to tail, light enough that the motion sensors in the corridor had not picked it up. It had pushed through a gap near the ceiling, climbed across the overhead pipes in the dark with the quiet, careful movements that predators are born knowing, and dropped. It landed directly between Nora's shoulder blades. The impact was not hard. It was more like the sudden pressure of 2 small hands pressing down. But the claws that came with it were real, and they dug into the back of her jacket with a grip that was surprisingly firm for something so small. Nora stopped walking. She stopped breathing for about 2 full seconds. Every part of her brain that was responsible for self-preservation sent the same message at the same time: do not move. She did not move. The hatchling shifted once, adjusting its weight. It was warm, warmer than she expected, and she could feel its ribcage rising and falling against her back in a fast, shallow rhythm. It made no sound. It did not bite. It did not drive its claws in any deeper than it already had. It simply settled, the way a cat settles when it finds a spot it likes, and went still. Nora stood in the middle of the corridor with a fully clawed predator dragon on her back and thought, very carefully, about what to do next. She turned her head slowly, just enough to see it from the corner of her eye. It was small, smaller than she had imagined from the briefing files she had skimmed when the shipment arrived. Its scales were a dark gray-green, still soft-looking at the edges the way young things are before they harden with age. Its eyes were closed. Its claws were hooked into the back of her jacket like it had decided she was a perfectly acceptable surface and had no plans to change that opinion. Sarev came around the corner at that exact moment. Sarev was a senior technician from the Kali Collective, an insectoid species that stood about 2 heads taller than most humans, with long jointed limbs and a pair of antennae that were usually in constant motion. Right now, they were completely flat. He had gone so still that for a moment Nora thought he had malfunctioned somehow. His compound eyes were fixed on the creature on her back, and the color of his upper carapace, which shifted with his mood, the way insectoid species often did, had gone from its usual pale amber to a flat, washed-out white. That was the Kali color for mortal terror. Nora looked at him. She kept her voice very low and very calm. She mouthed 2 words rather than saying them out loud. Do not move. Sarev did not move. They stood there in the corridor together, the 2 of them, while the hatchling on Nora's back breathed slowly and its claws stayed exactly where they were. After a long moment, Nora reached slowly for the comm unit clipped to her collar. She pressed the channel for the xenobiology wing and waited. When Dr. Orvine answered, she kept her voice to barely above a whisper. "Your hatchling found me," she said. "The small one. It is on my back. It seems calm. I need you to not set off any alarms." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Orvine said something in his native language that the translator did not catch, which probably meant it was not something he would have said in polite company. Nora waited. She still had 4 more crates to deliver. Dr. Orvine was a Duvari, which meant he had 4 arms, pale gray skin, and the kind of organized, careful mind that made him very good at his job and not particularly fun at social gatherings. He had spent 31 years working in xenobiology. He had catalogued over 400 alien species. He had been on 3 separate research stations before Viridian Outpost and had handled more than a few situations that could be described, politely, as complicated. Nothing in those 31 years had prepared him for a human maintenance worker quietly informing him over the comm that one of his Vreth hatchlings was sleeping on her back. He pulled up the species file immediately. He had written most of it himself. He knew what was in it. He read it again anyway, because he needed a moment to think, and reading familiar things gave his hand something to do. Vreth hatchlings. Threat classification 7. Venomous spines along the dorsal ridge, active within 48 hours of hatching. Pressure-sensitive aggression reflex. Sudden movement detected near the body triggers immediate defensive response. Instinctive threat assessment. Anything larger than itself is classified as a potential predator until proven otherwise. Recommended handling protocol. Full containment barrier, 2 trained specialists minimum, remote sedation where possible. He clicked off the file and opened the corridor camera feed for level 2. There was Nora Callahan, standing completely still in the middle of the corridor, with a Vreth hatchling curled between her shoulder blades like it was a perfectly normal place to be. Even through the low-resolution camera, he could see the small rise and fall of the creature's breathing. He could also see, with some alarm, that its claws had gone through the back of her jacket. "I am initiating containment protocol," he told her. "You need to stop moving and wait for the team. They will be there in 40 minutes. There was a brief pause. "I have 4 more crates to deliver," Nora said. "I understand that," Dr. Orvine said, in the patient tone he used when he was not feeling patient at all. "But you have a Vreth hatchling on your back. The delivery schedule is not the priority right now." "It is calm," she said. "It is not moving. I think if I keep moving slowly it will stay calm." "How long does containment actually take?" 40 minutes minimum. "I will be done with my route in 35. Dr. Orvine stared at his comm unit for a long moment. Then he stared at the camera feed. Then he opened a second channel and told the containment team to suit up and stand by, but to hold their position and wait for his signal. He was not entirely sure why he did that. It was not the correct protocol. He suspected it had something to do with the fact that the hatchling was, by every visible measure, completely calm, and that disturbing it now, with a full containment team in protective gear making noise and movement in the corridor, seemed more likely to cause a problem than to solve one. He watched the camera feed and did not say anything else for a while. Danny Flores heard about it from Sarev, who had sent a text message to the general crew channel that said only, "There is a Vreth hatchling on Callahan's back in Corridor 7 and she is still doing her delivery route. Please advise." Danny had worked with Nora for 14 months. He was 26, originally from New Mexico, and worked the same cargo shift 2 days a week as a part-time cross-assignment while his main job was in systems maintenance. He and Nora had eaten lunch together roughly 300 times. He knew her well enough to know that the message from Sarev was probably completely accurate and that there was very little point in being surprised by it. He found her in Corridor 9, pushing her cart toward the next delivery point with the careful, even steps of someone who was paying close attention to exactly how much they were moving. The hatchling was still there, scales catching the corridor light, claws hooked in, eyes half open now and watching the world with the slow, heavy gaze of a creature that was not quite awake but not quite asleep either. Danny stopped walking. He looked at the hatchling. He looked at Nora. "Your scanner is in your left pocket," Nora said quietly, without turning her head. "Crate 734 needs a verification scan before I can log it. Can you do that for me?" Danny took a breath. Then he reached over, took her datapad from the cart, and scanned the crate. "Verified," he said. "Thank you," she said. They walked together for a moment in silence. "Does it hurt?" Danny asked. "A little," she said. He nodded. He did not ask anything else. He just walked beside her and handed her the datapad when she needed it and held crate steady when she needed both hands to lift something, and the hatchling stayed exactly where it was the entire time, watching the corridor ahead with those half-open eyes. What neither of them knew was that by this point, almost 30 members of the station crew were watching the corridor cameras. The word had spread the way things always spread on a small station, quickly, quietly, and with a great deal of added detail that may or may not have been accurate. Most of the alien crew members watching were not doing so out of entertainment. They were watching because they did not understand what they were seeing. A Vreth hatchling had made physical contact with a non-Vreth creature and had not attacked it. It had settled on a warm-bodied mammal and gone to sleep. This was not something that happened. This was, as far as the station's senior xenobiologist could determine from 30 years of field research, something that had never been recorded happening. Sarev sent a second message to the crew channel. It still says, "Please advise." Nobody had an answer for him. An hour and 20 minutes into the shift, Nora had finished 5 of her 6 deliveries. Her back hurt. Not in a sharp way, not in a way that made her think anything was seriously wrong, but in the dull, steady way that comes from carrying extra weight in a place your body was not designed to carry it. The hatchling had not moved much. It had shifted twice, once when she bent down to pick up a dropped scanner, and once when a ceiling vent had rattled loudly overhead, but both times it had simply adjusted and settled again, claws finding new purchase in the back of her jacket. Both times, she had felt the points press a little deeper into her skin through the fabric. She did not say anything about that. What she did do, somewhere around the 90-minute mark, was start talking. It was not a decision, exactly. It was more that the corridor was quiet, and she was tired, and the hatchling was warm, and the silence had started to feel like it needed something in it. So she talked. Not loudly, almost under her breath, the way you talk to yourself when you think nobody is listening. "My grandmother had chickens," she said, pushing the cart slowly around the bend toward the last delivery point. "Back in Oregon. She had about a dozen of them. One of them, big white one, she called it Penny, used to jump up onto your shoulder if you stood still long enough. Just hop right up and sit there. Drove everyone crazy except my grandmother. She thought it was funny." The hatchling shifted its weight slightly. Its claws adjusted. It made a very low sound, barely a sound at all, more of a vibration that she could feel through her back rather than hear with her ears. She kept talking. "It rains a lot in Oregon. I used to think it was miserable when I was a kid. Now I kind of miss it. The way it sounds on a roof. There is nothing out here in deep space that sounds like rain on a roof." In the xenobiology lab, Dr. Orvine had been listening to the open comm for the past 40 minutes. He had not meant to keep listening. He had meant to monitor the situation and give instructions as needed. But there had been no crisis to respond to, and the situation had not changed, and somewhere along the way he had stopped monitoring and started just listening. Prex had arrived about 20 minutes in. Prex was a xenolinguist, a researcher who studied behavioral communication patterns across species. She was one of 2 humans on the station who held a research position rather than a technical one, a small, quick-moving woman from Boston named Dr. Carla Prex, who had the habit of writing in 3 different notebooks at the same time when something interested her. Right now she was very interested. She had pulled up a stool next to Dr. Orvine's monitoring station, opened 2 of her notebooks, and was writing fast. "She is narrating," Prex said, in the low voice she used when she was thinking out loud. "She is giving it context. She is treating it like a creature that can be made to feel oriented." "It cannot understand her," Dr. Orvine said. "Probably not the words," Prex said. "But tone is cross-species. Cadence is cross-species. She is keeping her voice slow and level, and she has been doing it for almost half an hour." She paused to write something down. "She is not doing it consciously. She probably does not even know she is doing it." Dr. Orvine watched the camera feed. Nora had stopped at the last delivery point and was logging the crate number on her datapad, moving slowly and carefully, keeping her upper body as still as she could manage while her hands worked. Then the hatchling dug its claws in hard when she bent forward to reach the lower shelf. It happened fast, a sudden deep grip, the kind of reflex that comes from instinct rather than intent, the kind of thing a young predator does when it feels its perch shift. Prex saw Nora's jaw tighten. She saw the small, controlled wince. She saw the way Nora pulled in one careful breath and straightened up slowly, not jerking away, not reacting with any sudden motion. And then, quietly, Nora said, "Careful, little rock." Not angry. Not afraid. Just the simple words, said gently, to a creature that had just hurt her. Prex stopped writing for a moment. Dr. Orvine cleared his throat. He had been wanting to ask something for a while, and now seemed like the time. "Miss Callahan," he said over the comm, "I would like to ask you something, if you do not mind." "Go ahead," she said. "Why have you not simply shaken it off? Or asked for sedation from a distance? There were options available to you from the beginning of this situation that would have removed the animal from your person without direct confrontation. Why did you not use them?" There was a pause. The kind of pause that means the person is actually thinking about it rather than just reaching for the first answer that comes to mind. "It chose to trust something it had no reason to trust," she said. "You do not shake that off." Dr. Orvine did not respond. Prex had stopped writing entirely. She was looking at the camera feed with an expression that was very hard to read. After a moment she picked up her pen again and wrote the words down exactly as Nora had said them, and drew a careful box around them, and did not say anything for a long time. The hatchling had gone still again. Its breathing was slow and regular against Nora's back. She called it Little Rock for the rest of the shift. Sarev wrote to his homeworld supervisor at the end of his work cycle. He did this every 3 weeks as part of his professional reporting requirement. A short summary of station activity, nothing formal, just the kind of update that kept his supervisors aware of what conditions were like on a joint species posting. He was not sure how to categorize what he had witnessed that morning, so he put it under the general heading of notable observations and tried to describe it as plainly as he could. He wrote that he had encountered a human crew member carrying a live Vreth hatchling on her back. He wrote that the hatchling had been there, by his estimation, for most of the morning, and that the human had continued her normal work duties for the entire duration. He wrote that she had not shown distress. He wrote that she had not shown elevated aggression, which was the other response his species training suggested as a possibility in high-threat situations. He wrote that she had, as far as he could observe, shown nothing in particular at all, other than the same calm, methodical pace she used every day when she was moving cargo crates from one level to another. He sat with the message for a moment before sending it. Then he added one more line at the bottom. "I am not certain humans have the same definition for the word danger that the rest of us do." He sent it and went to his bunk. In the xenobiology wing, the young Davari trainee who had been assigned to Dr. Orvine for the season, a student named Vet, who was on his first off-world posting and still found almost everything about the station surprising, had been watching the camera feed on and off all morning. He had asked Dr. Orvine 3 questions over the course of the shift, and Dr. Orvine had answered 2 of them. The third question was, why does she keep talking to it? Dr. Orvine had thought about this for longer than Vet expected. He was quiet for almost a full minute, watching the feed, where Nora was at the break room now, sitting at the table with her cold coffee, the hatchling still settled between her shoulder blades. "I think," Dr. Orvine said slowly, "that she is trying to make it feel safe." "Why?" Vet asked. "I am not entirely certain," Dr. Orvine said. "It does not benefit her directly. The hatchling cannot understand the content of what she is saying. The action itself, talking to it, giving it a name, narrating her environment, does not change her physical situation in any measurable way." He paused. "And yet she keeps doing it. Which suggests it is not something she decided to do. It is something she does." Vet looked at the feed. Nora had set down her coffee and was leaning back slightly in her chair, rolling one shoulder carefully. Danny was across from her, eating something from a ration pack and occasionally glancing at the hatchling with the expression of a person who has made his peace with a strange situation. "It seems like the wrong order," Vet said. "Usually you make sure you are safe first, and then you consider the other creature." "Yes," Dr. Orvine said. "Usually." He did not say anything else. But he kept watching the feed. Down in the engineering section, a cargo mechanic named Lou Garrett had heard about the situation from a passing crew member around midday. Lou was 43, had been on Viridian Outpost for 4 years, and had worked alongside Nora on cross-shift cargo jobs at least a dozen times. He listened to the summary, nodded once, and said, "Yeah, that sounds like Nora." The crew member telling him the story had expected a bigger reaction. He asked Lou if he was not alarmed. "She will handle it," Lou said simply, and went back to what he was doing. The crew member stood there for a moment, not sure what to do with that, and then went away. Prex had been writing and reviewing her notes for most of the afternoon by the time she sat down to draft a preliminary report for the Galactic Xenobehavior Institute. She wrote these reports periodically when she observed something that seemed worth formally documenting. Most of them were dry, technical things, tables of data, behavioral frequency charts, cross-species communication patterns catalogued in careful academic language. This one was harder to write, because she kept getting stuck on the question of what, exactly, she was documenting. She could describe what had happened easily enough. A human crew member had been landed on by a loose predator hatchling. Instead of triggering an emergency response, the human had remained calm, continued working, and over the course of several hours had established something that looked, by every behavioral marker Prex knew, like basic trust between herself and the animal. This was unprecedented. No non-Vreth creature had ever done this with a hatchling outside its own clutch. It should not have been possible. But the part that Prex could not quite get into academic language was the why. Because when she thought about it carefully, the most accurate answer she had was this. The human had done it because the hatchling was scared, and she had noticed, and it had not occurred to her to do anything other than help. She had not weighed the cost first. She had not assessed her own safety and then extended consideration to the animal. She had done it at the same time, or perhaps in the wrong order entirely. Comfort before caution, presence before protection. Prex had spent 11 years studying cross-species behavioral patterns. She had read more field reports than she could count. She had attended conferences, written papers, argued theories over long meals with colleagues who had done the same. She had never once seen a threat assessment that looked like that. She wrote the subject line of the report last. It said, Human Empathy Response, Threat Classification, Apex. She looked at it for a moment. Then she saved the file and closed her notebook. The containment team arrived at the break room at 13 minutes past the end of Nora's shift. There were two of them. Their names were Kovacs and Shen, a pair of specialist handlers who had been on standby since mid-morning, suited up in the layered protective gear that the station protocol required for any direct Vreth contact. The gear was heavy and made them look large and angular, and it made more noise when they moved than regular clothing did. They had a thermal carry pod between them, a sealed container lined with material that held heat, designed to keep young reptilian creatures calm during transport. They had done this kind of thing before. They were calm, professional, and knew exactly what they were doing. When they came through the break room door, the hatchling's eyes snapped open. It had been half asleep for the past 20 minutes, breathing slowly, tail curled loosely around Nora's left shoulder. Now it was completely awake. Its scales lifted slightly along its neck and back, a threat display, the kind that means I have noticed you and I do not like what I see. It pulled itself flat and tight against Nora's back, and it made a sound low in its chest that was not a purr and was not a growl but was somewhere in between, and was clearly not a friendly sound. Kovacs stopped moving immediately. Shen stopped moving immediately. Nora, who had turned her head to look at the containment team, let out a slow breath through her nose. "Okay," she said, quietly. "Not to the team. To the hatchling. Okay. It is all right. Nobody is going to move fast. See?" They stopped. The low sound in the hatchling's chest faded slightly but did not disappear. Kovacs looked at Shen. Shen looked at Kovacs. They had a short, silent conversation using only eye contact that communicated something along the lines of, "This is not how this usually goes." It took Nora 10 minutes. Not because the hatchling was being difficult. It was not, exactly, but because she was not willing to rush it. She talked it through every step. She told it what was happening. She told it the pod was warm and that it was going to be all right and that the people in the big suits were not going to hurt it. She reached up slowly and let it sniff her hand. She put her hand against the opening of the pod and let it investigate the smell of the lining. Then she took off her outer jacket, the one it had been clinging to for almost 3 hours, the one that smelled like her and like the cargo bays and like the particular mix of machine oil and coffee that made up her standard working day, and she folded it carefully and tucked it into the corner of the pod. The hatchling followed the jacket into the pod. It stepped inside, circled twice, pressed itself into the corner where the jacket was, and went still. Kovacs sealed the pod. Nobody in the break room said anything for a moment. Danny was still at the table. He had watched the whole thing with the expression of someone who was genuinely not sure whether what he had just seen was remarkable or simply the most Nora thing he had ever witnessed, and was leaning toward both simultaneously. The lead specialist, Kovacs, had been doing containment work for Vreth for nearly 20 years. She had relocated adult specimens across 3 star systems. She had written 2 of the standard protocols herself. She stood holding the sealed pod and looked at the folded jacket inside it and at the small scaled creature curled on top of it and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said to Dr. Orvine, who was listening on the open comm, "I have never seen a hatchling transfer trust to a non-clutch creature. Not in 20 years. Not once." Dr. Orvine said he knew. He had been watching. Nora pulled on her secondary jacket from her locker and picked up what was left of her cold coffee. She had a small line of puncture marks on each shoulder blade, already cleaned and covered with the basic medpack she kept in her cart. They were not serious. They would fade in a week. Danny walked out of the station with her at the end of the shift. The corridor outside was quieter now, the kind of quiet that comes after a long and complicated day. The overhead lights had shifted to the evening setting, slightly warmer, slightly lower, and the recycled air had the particular staleness it always had by late afternoon when the ventilation cycle had not run for a while. "Does your back hurt?" Danny asked. "Yes," Nora said. "A lot. Would you do it again?" She thought about that for a moment. They walked a few steps in silence. "I would have done it either way," she said. "I just did not want it to be scared." Danny shook his head slowly. He did not say anything else. Nora finished her coffee. 3 weeks later, a formal notice arrived from the Galactic Xenobehavior Institute. It was addressed to Nora Callahan, Cargo and Maintenance Specialist, Viridian Outpost. The language was formal and full of long words, the kind of document written by people who work in institutions and take a great deal of care about how things are phrased. It described her actions as an unprecedented exercise of interspecies empathic stabilization under active threat conditions, and informed her that she was being formally commended for it. She printed it out in the break room. She read it twice. Then she pinned it to the wall above the small table in the corner, next to a sticky note that she had written herself in plain black marker. The sticky note said, "Little Rock's Corner." Below the note was a single photograph, printed on standard copy paper, the kind of printout that costs nothing and fades in a few months. It showed a small-scaled creature, gray-green and soft-edged, curled between a pair of human shoulders with its eyes closed and its claws folded in, fast asleep. Nobody took the photo down. Not in the months that followed, not when the crew rotations changed and new faces came through the break room who did not know the story. Not when the sticky note faded and had to be replaced. Not when the photograph itself yellowed slightly at the corners from the corridor light. It stayed on the wall. And every person who came through and asked about it got the same story from whoever was in the room, told in a different order, with different details depending on who was telling it, with more or less dramatic pausing depending on the teller's mood. But always ending the same way. She just did not want it to be scared. And she carried it through the whole shift.